Hey folks, Rudros here for a fun video on Friday, and this is going to be a little different. I've done stuff like this in the past from the RVA Returners tournament. This is all footage I captured myself. There's no footage from the stream this time, but I don't really want to go through the matches like point by point. It's more to just give you an overview and to talk about concepts and ideas here in Opus 22. So I'll be skipping ahead a bit, and again, I'm not really going for a play-by-play, just giving you ideas. So as you can see from my opening hand here, I'm playing Mono Ice. And the idea was to use new cards like Emina, as well as Kurasame, to really build for this, I guess you could call it mid-range or even late-game Mono Ice. And if it's worth doing, I will put a link to the deck list I used in the description below. It's by no means finalized. This is probably my... After tonight, where I had 4 rounds, I've probably tested it about 8 times total now. So enough to feel that I've got some good thoughts on it. It's, again, by no means finalized. I'm sure there's ideas and things to explore. But in the last set, Mono Ice was rather strong, but it was strong as an aggressive discard format where you really want to hit your opponent hard and early. And this Kurasame card can potentially discard 5 cards from your opponent's hand, but only if you have a bunch of ice backups, right? Which now is a little easier thanks to cards like Emina, but does require you to play slower, and that tends to be a bit of an at odds with discard in general, because usually when discard is at its best, at least in its Mono Ice form, is to hit them early and aggressive, because if they get set up, then it just doesn't really matter. So how well will this do? Well, we'll see. Again, I'm going to kind of skip ahead. This match is a little weird. Our opponent is playing a Windwater Monstralist, but they have a bit of a weird start. They don't have any backups themselves. They just had to do a Naked Tomeberry turn 2. Next turn, they legit just do Shinryu to go search out a backup. So they have something to play. So already, I'm kind of okay in this matchup, just because 1, I'm not getting beat down by aggression, and 2, you know, they've got such a rough start as is. So we've just kind of naturally curved out. Here we're gonna do Emina. And there's a lot of targets this card can get, and I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure what the right targets are. I do like armor a lot because it can be played for free, which is what I opt to get here. And then I'm set up for the Shinryu Celestia on the next turn. However, there's also a lot of really good ice backups that you honestly want down. Unileska being one of them, Arcanist being another one, the 3-cost Kefka, which is a payoff from when you get to a full board or to 5 ice backups. There's also Edward, which lets you snipe cards from your opponent's break zone. I think now more than ever that card is insanely relevant because there's so much break zone recursion. And so while I appreciate the freeness of getting these armorers down, I'm not sure if that's the right play. And that's something I want you to think about too a lot while you're watching this. I'm not going to give you a definitive yes or no. I'm just going to give you some feelings. So just think about too how you feel about it. I will say, too, this Sephiroth has felt a bit underwhelming in practice. We'll skip ahead here. So I am going to do the thing. So I don't need to put down Shinryu if I want to do Kurasame this turn, because if I'm trying to discard his hand, I don't need the full 5. So I actually throw out the Shinryu because I was like, I'll draw into another backup. And I asked, kindly discard 4 cards from your hand, please, which does work. And, you know, this is why I wanted to test this, because the discard effect in particular, not the dull freeze. I think the dull freeze is a lot weaker than it seems on paper, and I'll go into that more later. But the discard is essentially the only way to reset off of 1 card at this point in the game. Even if you're against a mono wind list, and they have a full 5 cards in hand, and they usually shouldn't have more than that because they had to end their turn with 5, so unless they somehow drew on your turn. You know, Kurasame just says, yep, I will take your entire hand. I'm resetting you back to a top deck mode. That's very potent. Again, even Theodore with a Warpin couldn't necessarily do it. If they had 5 in hand, yeah, he'll take 3, which is huge, nothing to sneeze at. But to take a full 5 for whatever to shrink their hand to size feels very good. So I cannot dispute the impact of the discard in particular from Kurasame. However, I will say too, after that, he doesn't do anything. He just kind of sits there. And these days, it just feels a bit worse and worse to pay a card that their only ability is an effect on entry. Usually, some of the better cards in the game not only have immediate value when they come into play, they have continued value. So we'll skip ahead a little bit here. He does still get a backup, and you know, here's one of those weird ice things, right? He had nothing in hand. He still was able to get a backup that he can put down. Now, the nice thing is whatever he searches off the Larsa, I'm just going to make him potentially chunk it again with the Unalesca, or even better, you just draw into Rufus and do that. He actually attacked with the Shinryu, so I just blocked with Kurasame. As again, I would rather just play another one. Yeah, the Blizzaga special is fine, but I think he gets more value potentially playing the next one. So now I'm just doing Rufus things. Now with both a Rufus and a Unalesca on board, I'm threatening to keep whacking his hands. He was able to get down another backup. Rufus is going to just keep pulling cards from his hand. He can use it for the Toneberry, but I'm not overly worried about that. I've got another Rufus in hand. It means he gets rid of it. So here, let's see Kurasame again. Keep the Arcanist up, as it's the only backup I could use on his turn. Realize I don't need another Rufus. Sephiroth is, man, the amount of cards I've run into that are just brave or just don't attack. This has made Sephiroth feel so worthless. So here, I say Dull Freeze 4. I opt to hit the Tonberry as well. I could have just hit the backups, but trying to keep that Rufus alive there. So this, again, is strong, right? There's no real ice cards that do that much. So it is strong on paper. And in this particular match, because I'm already so far ahead, it feels extra strong. But I'll show you a match later where maybe it doesn't feel as strong. So, I mean, this one's pretty much, again, we've kind of got it. We go in with Rufus. We can rip anything out of his hand if he hits an EX burst that let him draw. Limit breaks, we'll get into those too, as they have felt, particularly in ice, quite weak. And Victoria in general, I'm just... I don't know why I was so high on that card originally. Maybe it just read better than it played, but playing it in practice. And it's funny because my buddy was trying to convince me, no, dude, that card sucks. That card sucks. And, you know, but Ghoul on the review, no, it's good. And other people trying to tell me, and playing it, especially compared to some of the other limit breaks, it feels very weak. So Cloud can just break any 3 cost or less on entry. You just summon him, he breaks 3 cost or less. Victoria does 7,000 damage, which is pretty universally worse other than a few situations. And it only happens if they have 2 or less cards in hand. So I'm going to have some matches later where they have a full hand of cards. So I can't even use the limit break. It legit doesn't do anything. And it frustrates me that they continue to do this design sometimes where, you know, you are putting a condition on an effect. There are so many cards in this game, you play them and they just happen, right? They don't have a condition. Why is Rufus so good? He enters the field or attacks, do one of these 3's effect. It's not, oh, if you have this many Turks in the break zone, if you have this. If Rufus had all those conditions, he would be way weaker. Kurasame also has a bunch of conditions, right? You have to play ice backups. You cannot turn one Kurasame your opponent. And there's nothing that says you can't put conditions on cards. You can. As a matter of fact, I like that design space, but you then need to make the effect stronger. If I need a bunch of things to go right before this effect is live, then the effect needs to be stronger than average. Victoria paying 4 to deal 7,000 damage is an average rate. Like there's nothing special about that. So the fact that they also have to have 2 cards or less in hand for it to work, I think they missed the mark on that. Again, why doesn't Cloud? Cloud doesn't have to target an active forward, or if they control 5 or less cards in the break zone, he just says, no, come in, bop them on the head. It's why people like the Surges card, right? I think they're kind of overrating that card, but they like, because there's no condition. It's just come in, dull something, come in, freeze something. That's it. No conditions, no if, ands, or buts. If you're trying to knock that final blocker out of the game, yeah, he just comes in and he knocks him out. So while our opponent still gets to get a bunch of backups, I'm still very far ahead as I'm just forcing them on top deck mode. So I'm just going to kind of keep skipping through this. Biblos is fun. Of course, nothing to discard. We just go ahead and knock that out of the way. And yeah, this one's pretty much over. Nothing they can do about it. So we're going to move on to the next match. So you saw in that first match that Kurasame could be effective. Granted, our opponent had a pretty slow start, so I kind of take that one with a grain of salt. This match is a very good demonstration of how ice, especially later in the game, just falls flat against certain elements, abilities, attributes. So we've got Amino, we've got a really good backup curve. We've got a Kurasame. I'm ready for the big turn. Our opponent's playing 4 colors. They get set up on turn 2. Claris into King Typhoon, into Lena. It's always nice when you can curve out that efficiently. Here I do make a bit of a blunder. For some reason, I think, I don't know why, I get confused with Lufenian and the Armorer. So I think in my head that I have and another armorer in hand. So I ultimately, or maybe I'm thinking of a later game, but yeah, I was like, oh, I can just play armorer and then play armor. I'll be on 5, and then I realized, no, wait, no, that's not an armorer. So go get Unalesca. And again, there's some nice cards. I have 3 cards right now that technically tap for an effect on my backup line, which is quite nice. Here's the problem, though. Our opponent is just going to play Cecil, Warrior of Light. Warrior of Light for free, you know, the best beater body in the game, and completely for free off the Cecil. And Cecil is a card that just absolutely craps on ice. That if I target anything on his board, not just his forwards, if I hit it, if he's got monsters, if I hit his backups, I have to pay extra. Ice, which should be the taxing element, am now having to pay extra for the Cecil. So the Cecil's going to rip me apart because everything Ice does still in Opus 22 is targeting, is choosing things. We still do not have just really strong generic effects in Ice that say, hey, just deal with the board. You know, just get rid of something without having to target it. So you're going to see all the hoops I'm going to have to jump through just to get this Cecil out of the way. And I can't win while the Cecil's on the way. Now, there's an argument here. I could just put down Lufenian for nothing and just slap Kurasame and rip his hand to shreds, but what's Kurasame going to do against Warrior of Light? Absolutely nothing. So I'm hoping he attacks in with the Cecil, because then I can use this Sephiroth hand trap, right? No, he continues to curve out. He's got his 4-color Warrior of Light now online naturally. Tyro attacks me, hits Y'shtola, and wisely doesn't attack with the Cecil because he knows he doesn't have to. So I am forced to, on his main 2 before he ends, use Kefka, which Kefka, in a normal circumstance, as long as you have 5 bias backup, says pay 1 CP, dull freeze a forward opponent controls, which is fine. I don't think it's actually quite the insane payoff it should be. With all the other things in the game that just cost 0, I think Kefka should have cost 0. Again, it's a conditional effect. You cannot even do it without 5 full ice backups effect. So I think it should have been limited to once per turn. And yeah, you can just pay 0 and do it. Or again, you can only do it once. I guess that maybe they were trying to do it once between phases, so that way you can't do it your turn and your opponent's turn. And I have no issue with that. But so here I have to pitch my whole hand to get rid of this Cecil, because Kefka now, instead of costing 1, costs 3. Sephiroth now, instead of costing 3, costs 5 to get rid of this Cecil. So, terrible value for me, but also Kefka, I can't use Kefka if Cecil's on the field. I'm in ice. I don't have a good way to recur value into my hands. I can't afford to do that turn after turn after turn. Comes back to me. There's little I can do other than throw away the backup. I can replay the Sephiroth from the remove from game, which gets another card out of his hand, which is fine, not amazing. And it knocks down the Warrior of Light. Now, the Warrior of Light isn't as big of a deal to deal with because of Kefka, right? Warrior of Light, all of his text requires him to be upright, to be active. If he's dull, he's not doing anything. Well, check out this this craziness my opponent's about to drop on. I'm trying to play, again, a very essentially fair ice game. And they're going to tap a water and an earth. They're going to play Earth Cecil. So they're going to take a point of damage. And wouldn't you know it? Ba-ding! It's EX Burst Vossler. So now, not only does he go to get out a king, I think he gets another copy of Claris, or he gets a copy of King Tycoon, immediately breaks the Cecil to pull in Green Cecil, who then is going to play Rosa for free. And so he paid 2 CP, right? He tapped 2 backups. He tapped Earth, paid 2. And for that, he got an EX burst, so he got essentially his 2 CP refunded in the form of a card. Searched out a 5-cost win card that I can't, that just completely craps on my game plan. And Rosa, which also just invalidates all of my dull freeze. And again, this Rosa is free. There is no cost to that action ability. I have to still pay 1 for Kefka. This Rosa just, at all times, and this is what I mean about conditional, unconditional, she unconditionally just says, no, give something extra power, activate something. No conditions attached to it. Cecil, same thing. There's no conditions attached to the taxing of the characters. If he's on the field, he's protecting your board. There's no, well, if you have 4 characters in play, then he does this effect. If you have only win characters in play, then he does this effect. So for the cost of tapping 2 backups, he essentially got 11 CP worth of value. 5 on the Cecil, 4 on the Rosa, and the EX burst added, you know, a card to hand. So yeah, roughly 11 CP worth of value for tapping 2 backups. That's just insane. Like, yeah, how do you compete with that much value? And everything over on my side, I'm essentially paying for fairly. The only thing that I think I have that even cheats value is Shantoto by paying 1. So now again, to get rid of this Cecil, I have to not only spend 3 with the Kefka, because I got to pay the tax to dull freeze it, I have to essentially try to bait out or cheat around the Rosa effect, because if I try to just break it with the Bard here like I'm trying to do, he can just reactivate on the stack with the Rosa. So I have to wait till the end of the turn. He tries to use the Rosa naturally. Then I've got a Bard on top. But even so, it costs me everything. It costs me so much to do that, and I lose a backup for it. I mean, I'm just paying out of my mind to get rid of this one card. And you still have a Rosa Warrior of Light combo, which says kill anything on your board that's less than 11,000 power, which is everything. If anything is 10,000 or less, it'll die to a Warrior of Light ping, Rosa reactivate, Warrior of Light ping again, which is just insanely strong. Yeah, so this deck it completely craps on everything I'm doing. So this is a very poor showing for ice. So I'm just going to go ahead and move on to the next one because there's just not much left to do. Our opponent just gets further and further ahead, and there's just, yeah, I'm just playing catch up the entire time. So not a good showing for ice here. This one, our opponent is on, I believe, category 8. Essentially Ice Lightning with some fire mixed in as well. Lufenian's a great backup to see turn 1. So in this list, I only have 1 Lufenian, right? And perhaps that's the wrong play to make, because in order for this backup to get value on entry, you have to see it. It has to be the first one you see, which implies you then want to play 3 of it, but then I'm diluting my other backups. But maybe that's the right play, so tell me if that's the right play or not. This Shiva I have in the hand right now. I have tried this several times now. There are a few times it has done something that it will just blank their board entirely. Again, technically it's a good card against something like Cecil from the last matchup, because I just blank the board, and then now none of those cards have any text. The problem being, if they have something like Rosa, Warrior of Light, they'll just use that in response to the Shiva if they're able to. And then what do I follow that up with? I mean, I can dull freeze a bunch of things, but then Rosa on her next turn, when it all comes back, just gets it all right back. So it's a neat card. It's a neat idea. I personally think it's going to be too spotty and too inconsistent to want to find a home in a deck. It'd be a great card if we ever had a true sideboard in this game, not a limit break board, but a sideboard, because that way you put it into matchups where it'll actually be relevant. So our opponent has to go Rufus. They've got 1 in hand. I just go ahead and bop it out with the Y'shtola. Y'shtola's still probably some of the best removal in ice, but unfortunately that's not saying. I think that's more a reflection on the other removal in the element and just how lacking it is. So this one is a bit more in my favor, as I made a little to develop. We do get down to a full, I think we're going to do a full Kurasame turn here. So we go ahead and bop the Renoa as well. Actually, here our opponent has too many cards in hand for their Renoa to matter, so I just remind them, oh, hey, don't worry about that. We do hit 2 EX bursts, too. Fujin and I think that's President Shinra he got before then. So one of those things that just always is going to hurt any form of discard ice is when you're trying to hit their hand. And the EX bursts just keep feeding it. It's easier when they have nothing in hand and they get a single card, because then usually you can use something like Unalesca. Although you can see the way the backups developed this time, I couldn't get Unalesca down. And the only one of these that's breakable is the Bard. And if you're breaking the Bard, now you're turning off your Shinryu, now you're turning off your Kefka. So the backup line is still a bit weird. I'm not sure what the proper order is, if it's best to prioritize things like armor and you just want to get 5 as quick as you can and you don't care what's down. Maybe that's right. Or maybe there are specific things you want to see. I mean, Nero makes Weiss so much more potent. Weiss feels very bad to play when Nero isn't on the field. And I had some of these games where, because I'm just trying to ramp to 5 as quick as I lock myself out of the Nero Weiss combo. And so now Weiss is just a card that comes down and doesn't do anything on entry. So opponent locks down Y'shtola, and I'll get to show you the big play here. They have a full 5 in hand, and here he comes, Kurasame. So I said, okay, discard 5. Let me get 5 cards out of your hand. Very good, very gross play, right? However, our opponent does actually have a response. They have an Eden in play, or in their hand. Eden costs 5, but when you're going to lose your entire hand anyway, who cares? Just I'll just dump, and that's what any opponent should do, is they'll just dump everything they're possibly able to. So while they will go to an empty hand, Kurasame and Ishtola will die for it. I opt to use the Blizzaga special on the stack. I considered trying to save him for the next turn, but I just want to get rid of the Rufus. The Rufus allows him to put continued pressure back on me. So I probably should have held the Ishtola over the Weiss, but I have Nero Weiss at least, so this one goes on. Nero Weiss comes in. Good old Glaciolabulus. I know so many people have moved on from this card, and believe me, I want to too, but I just think Ice Summons are just that kind of poor. Cool, we got Kefka. Doesn't do anything, again, against a board like this. Our opponent still getting established, even though I was able to pull 5 cards out of their hand. But we get Kurasame back. I think this time I go for the Dull Freeze, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, so we pull Kurasame back with Shantoto. And now he has 0 in hand, so yeah, I Dull Freeze the entire board. So 5 character Dull Freeze the board. Good. Unequivocally good. I'm not going to make any bones about that. Although I kind of alluded to something earlier, because I don't know if you get to see it in a later match. I'll just kind of touch on it here. The one issue with that is, again, I find Ice to be the most successful when it's being aggressive about your resources. That's Ice's thing, is I hit your resources. I hit your hand. I hit your board, so you can't use your backups, so you can't activate stuff. And the sooner you do that, the more likely you are to win. Because if they get a chance to set up all their resources, then they just have that much more to work with. So him Dull Freezing 5 characters, and in this case mostly 5 backups, is very strong. But by its very nature, I'm Dull Freezing 5 characters, which means they have 5 characters on the board. Now, in this particular situation, I'm very far ahead, but I've already experienced a match where an opponent goes so wide and so big. I've Dull Frozen 5 forwards, which is very strong. Hey, I kept myself alive for a single turn, but then they all just stand back up after they've had their time down, or if they have Rosa or Une or Porum or just any of these cards that, even if they're Dull Frozen, still technically generate value. It doesn't deal with any of that, so man, yeah, it's it can be a bit rough. Obviously, this goes really well. We'll move on to the final one. This match, we get to open a turn 1 Lufenia, and this match actually turns into a bit of a slobber knocker. More ways than one. Our opponent is playing Mono Fire, so I instantly know, okay, I've got to be mindful of Montleonis, which is an absolutely insane limit break card, and leads to even more frustration playing Mono Ice, because you'll see turns like this, if our opponent gets set up on 5 backups, it doesn't actually matter if I put their hand to 0. If they have 5 backups, technically they only need 4. Well, they need 5 for the Manta trigger, but they only need to be able to tap 4. So even if I Dull Freeze one of the backups, as long as they can use 4 to generate CP, they can always Montleonis, regardless of what they draw for turn. They just hit the backups. They pitch the 2 cards, boom, they have Montleonis. And that's very frustrating that I can't do anything about that. I cannot hit their limit break deck. You know, I can put their hand to 0, but unless I somehow keep their entire back row Dull Frozen, which is a very, very tall task, then I'm just not able to do anything about that. This one goes on pretty lengthy, so I'm just going to kind of skip through it. Our opponent uses their limit break deck, uses a Ifrit as well as a Zac, and that's exactly what the Zac was for, right? Little ways to increase it. And my friend who was watching this kind of commented on this too. He was like, Fire has so many ways to supplement a card like Zac, right? 3k ping on its own isn't very much, but you can use a Jin to increase it. You can use a Leftia to increase it, a Mutsuki backup to increase it. These are all cards he's going to get into play. An Ifrit to increase it. My Victoria, which does 7k if they have 2, like, what do you do about that? I think there's maybe 1 ice card that increases damage ice characters deal, and I can't even think of what it is off the top of my head. I just feel like I remember seeing that text. So, yeah, my limit breaks, there's not a whole lot to supplement them. I guess you could argue with the Surgis, like, well, if you can dull something now, he comes through with the freeze, but you're still using multiple resources to do that. So, and again, they're still just a bit conditional. So we play Physalis is my only way to generate advantage. As you'll see many players do, I opt to draw a card with her. And again, she's conditional, right? If they have 4 above in hand, like he does currently, the card doesn't do anything. So yes, it's satisfying at 0 because you get both a Dull Freeze and a draw, but it's so conditional. And again, I don't mind if they want to make conditional ices thing. Hey, it's got all these strong effects, but I don't have an issue with that, but they need to be stronger than average. And my problem is it seems like a lot of these effects are very average, and you have to meet their conditions as well. So unfortunately, it's just because of, or at least what I feel is the pressure, I don't feel like I can really set up my backups. I'm trying to set up the Amina Armorer turn and the Amray for Kurasame. Sephiroth feels okay. Yeah, I mean, he's not, I don't know. Again, they have to be dull, and there's a lot of matchups I've run into already. Maybe I'm just unlucky, and I've been facing a bunch of people who use Brave stuff, or something like this Alua. I can Sephiroth in this Alua, but with no way to get value back into my hand off a card draw other than Physalis, I'm then just giving up my own gas, my own pressure, my own backups for the next turn to kill this thing. And she already did her thing. So even if I were to drop the Sephiroth to kill the Alua, she did what she wanted to do. She declared the attack, so it doesn't matter as much now if I'm spending more to kill her. And nice Nero there. Finally get to a full 5. As you can see, I think Amina, I'll just show you the line, yeah, Amina for the 2 armors, get to 5. And I like this line a lot. I do enjoy it. I think the armors are clearly a good combo with her, but now I have a single card on my backup line that I can use to interact with my opponent. I have the Shinryu Celestia. No Kefka, no Edward, no Arcanist, no Unalesca. And I miss those cards. When they're not on there, I can feel the loss of them. So let me know what you think. What is the right way to go about getting to these 5 backups? Is it to just go the armor route, get there as quickly as you can, or that, well, no, if you don't have the backups with the payoffs, like the Shinryu Celestia, Kefka, etc., it's really not worth it. So opponent plays Jekt, which is an insane card. This card is completely free based on fire characters. So he counts backups, he counts forwards, he counts monsters, and does 9,000 to something on entry. Yeah, he dies too, but who cares? He didn't pay anything for it. He just put a card from hand. That card is so strong. You know, and I guess, yeah, right, but it should be, because it has conditions. It's based on the number of fire characters you control. If you play that raw dog turn 1, then it costs you a full 6, which doesn't feel nearly as good. But it also can become completely free, which is just kind of nutty. Skip ahead a bit here. Puts out a little Leela. And again, without Unalesca, cards like Weiss and Biblos now are way weaker, right? Because I don't have a way to continually trigger this discard. The only way I could trigger discard in my hand is the Sephiroth or Toto to get back Kurasame, which I consider, but he only has 1 card in hand. So Kurasame 1 isn't amazing. I could dull freeze the board, but I opt for Physalis correctly or incorrectly because I'm trying to get more card value. And I was like, well, this way I can at least... And yeah, Physalis coming in gets a single dull freeze. Paying 5 for a single dull freeze is just awful. Like that, you know. Again, if you get the dull freeze and the draw, way better. But so our opponent just floods the board with these goblins, you know, backup goblin, backup goblin, backup goblin. And now these goblins alone can just can kill the Physalis just by dulling all the goblins. It's a 1-cost monster that replaces itself and has an additional effect. Yep, there's a completely free Jekt, so Jekt just go ahead and takes care of Shantoto. And yeah, I can pump her by 4. The 4K bump, that's not nothing. That's really not bad, but it doesn't matter in the face of this kind of overwhelming firepower. So this is a pretty one-sided match. I struggle to try to catch up. Sephiroth to cause a discard and just trying to hold his board down. And John mentioned this on the stream that the dull freezing is just temporary. Like, dull freezing Alua is nice because it's preventing it from coming in, but it's still there. I now have to either continuously dull freeze it or get rid of it eventually, because if it ever untaps and can attack, now I'm in trouble. Same with like a Warrior of Light 4-cost one. I have to keep spending resources to dull freeze. Here you can see Montleonis and just the insane power of this card. So he limit breaks Montleonis, which again, I couldn't hit it. I couldn't stop it if I wanted to because I can't hit his hand. The Minwu, which pulls back the Jekt, which doesn't cost anything, so you cast it for free, plus the Luna. I mean, just my God, look at this firepower. And yeah, you have to get to 5 backups for Montleonis, and he costs 8. But he's a huge payoff. Yes, he's conditional, but the payoff for that is clearly insane versus the payoff of something like Victoria feels very pedestrian by comparison. So somehow I have just enough to survive through the monsters and the Shinryu, but this is pretty much over. Yeah, I'm just essentially stalling as long as I can. Yeah, Glacial have this nice little 2-for-1, kill one, freeze another. It's still a body there, and there's still stuff like this Luneth that's just going to kill any forward I dare put out in the middle of the turn. So here, I use my own limit break. I use the Victoria to bop the Luneth, kill it for 7k, which is fine. Yeah, is it better than nothing? Sure, it's absolutely better than nothing. But is this the way to be playing Ice and Opus 22? That I'm not convinced of. Anyway, opponent just has too much on board. Can get the Allure right back with the Minwu, which is quite a strong card. Clearly, this Monofire stuff is no joke. Leftia makes something like this backup Mitsuki, which normally does 1k ping, which is really not much. And now it becomes a 3k ping because of her. So yeah, Leftia also an insane card to use for all this. So opponent essentially just runs this over. Just, again, wanted to give some thoughts on this. I'll put a link in the deck list description if you're interested. Again, small sample size, maybe about 8-ish games, but enough for me to at least feel like I understand where a lot of these cards are. And if it were me, and if I were looking to play Mono Ice this Opus, and I'm trying to win with it, I'm trying to be competitive, it seems that the aggressive version is still the way to go. That you want to turn one Lufenian, Rufus, rip 2 cards out of their hands, and continually keep that discard pressure on them. I like the idea of the Kurasame, but I don't know. And again, I don't know. You tell me, because in some of those games, yeah, ripped 5 cards out of their hands, put them to a reset. Maybe that was absolutely worth it. But in practice, I think you would have more success most of the time going the aggressive route. Because if I'm going for this long game too, is this really better than Earth Ice? Earth Ice has already proven that if it gets set up in the long game, it can do the same thing. It has the Unalesca and the Weiss and the Biblos to just lock you down constantly. And it has things like Larketius, which can revive Scaletoad, which can revive the Biblos. It has Shantoto and Hecaton Kyre and these big board wipes to make sure you don't die to all big boards like this. So if I'm going long game Ice, why not just do Ice Earth? It seems more effective. Why not just do Ice Wind? Ice Wind can dull freeze a board much earlier and more consistently than this Kurasame. Like, it's a cool idea. It's a really cool card, but at least testing it so far, it just doesn't feel like it's the way you should be playing Mono Ice if you're really trying to win. It feels far too slow. So if you had a different experience, please let me know. I'd love to hear about it. If you've got suggestions, all that as well. So those are my thoughts. Appreciate you watching and enjoy your weekend. Take care. Bye.